Book 3, Chapters 1 through 3 of The Wars of the Jews. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wars of the Jews by Josephus. Translated by William Whiston. Book 3, Chapters 1 through 3. Book 3, containing the interval of about 1 year, from Vespasian's coming to subdue the Jews to the taking of Gamala. Chapter 1. Vespasian is sent into Syria by Nero in order to make war with the Jews. When Nero was informed of the Romans' ill success in Judea, a concealed consternation and terror, as is usual in such cases, fell upon him. Although he openly looked very big, and was very angry, and said that what had happened was rather owing to the negligence of the commander than to any valor of the enemy, and as he thought it fit for him, who bare the burden of the whole empire, to despise such misfortunes, he now pretended to do so, and to have a soul superior to all such sad accidents whatsoever. Yet did the disturbance that was in his soul plainly appear by the solicitude he was in how to recover his affairs again. And as he was deliberating to whom he should commit the care of the East, now it was in so great a commotion, and who might be best able to punish the Jews for their rebellion, and might prevent the same distemper from seizing upon the neighboring nations also, he found no one but Vespasian equal to the task, and able to undergo the great burden of so mighty a war, seeing he was growing an old man already in the camp, and from his youth had been exercised in warlike exploits. He was also a man that had long ago pacified the West, and made it subject to the Romans, when it had been put into disorder by the Germans. He had also recovered to them Britain by his arms, which had been so little known before, whereby he procured to his father Claudius to have a triumph bestowed upon him without any sweat or labor of his own. Footnote: take the confirmation of this in the words of Suetonius, here produced by Dr. Hudson. In the reign of Claudius, says he, Vespasian, for the sake of Narcissus, was sent as a lieutenant of a legion into Germany. Thence he removed into Britain battles with the enemy. We may also here note from Josephus that Claudius the emperor, who triumphed for the conquest of Britain, was enabled to do so solely by Vespasian's conduct and bravery, and that he is here styled the father of Vespasian. End footnote. So Nero esteemed these circumstances as favorable omens, and saw that Vespasian's age gave him sure experience and great skill, and that he had his sons as hostages for his fidelity to himself, and that the flourishing age they were in would make them fit instruments under their father's prudence. Perhaps also there was some interposition of Providence, which was paving the way for Vespasian's being himself emperor afterwards. Upon the whole, he sent this man to take upon him the command of the armies that were in Syria. But this not without great encomiums and flattering compilations, such as necessity required, and such as might mollify him into complaisance. So Vespasian sent his son Titus from Achaia, where he had been with Nero, to Alexandria, to bring back with him from thence the 5th and the 10th legions, while he himself, when he had passed over the Hellespont, came by land into Syria, where he gathered together the Roman forces, with a considerable number of auxiliaries from the kings in that neighborhood. Chapter 2. A great slaughter about Ascalon. Vespasian comes to Ptolemais. Now the Jews, after they had beaten Cestius, were so much elevated with their unexpected success, they could not govern their zeal, but like people blown up into a flame by their good fortune, carried the war to remoter places. Accordingly, they presently got together a great multitude of all their most hardy soldiers, and marched away for Ascalon. This is an ancient city that is distant from Jerusalem 520 furlongs, and was always an enemy to the Jews, on which accounts they determined to make their first effort against it, and to make their approaches to it as near as possible. This excursion was led on by 3 men, who were the chief of them all, both for strategy and sagacity: Niger, called the Persite, Silas of Babylon, and besides them John the Essene. Now Ascalon was strongly walled about, but had almost no assistance to be relied upon near them, for the garrison consisted of 1 cohort of footmen and 1 troop of horsemen, whose captain was Antonius. These Jews, therefore, out of their anger, marched faster than ordinary, and, as if they had come but a little way, approached very near the city, and were come even to it. But Antonius, who was not unapprised of the attack they were going to make upon the city, drew out his horsemen beforehand, and being neither daunted at the multitude, nor the courage of the enemy, received their first attacks with great bravery. And when they crowded to the very walls, he beat them off. Now the Jews were unskillful in war, but were to fight with those who were skillful therein. They were footmen to fight with horsemen. They were in disorder to fight those that were united together. They were poorly armed to fight those that were completely so. They were to fight more by their rage than by sober counsel, and were exposed to soldiers that were exactly obedient, and did everything they were bidden upon the least intimation. So they were easily beaten. For as soon as ever their first ranks were once in disorder, they were put to flight by the enemy's cavalry, and those of them that came behind, such as crowded to the wall, fell upon their own party's weapons, and became one another's enemies. And this was so long until they were all forced to give way to the attacks of the horsemen, and were dispersed all the plain over, which plain was wide, and all fit for the horsemen, which circumstance was very commodious for the Romans, and occasioned the slaughter of the greatest number of the Jews. For such as ran away, they could overrun them, and make them turn back. And when they had brought them back after their flight, and driven them together, they ran them through, and slew a vast number of them, insomuch that others encompassed others of them, and drove them before them whithersoever they turned themselves, and slew them easily with their arrows. And the great number there were of the Jews seemed a solitude to themselves, by reason of the distress they were in, while the Romans had such good success with their small number, that they seemed to themselves to be the greater multitude. And as the former strove zealously under their misfortunes, out of the shame of a sudden flight, and hopes of the change in their success, so did the latter feel no weariness by reason of their good fortune, insomuch that the fight lasted till the evening, till 10,000 men of the Jews' side lay dead, with 2 of their generals, John and Silas, and the great part of the remainder were wounded, with Niger, their remaining general, who fled away to the small town of Idumea, called Salis. Some few also of the Romans were wounded in this battle. Yet were not the spirits of the Jews broken by so great a calamity, but the losses they had sustained rather quickened their resolution for other attempts. For, overlooking the dead bodies which lay at their feet, they were enticed by their former glorious actions to venture on a second destruction. So when they had lain still so little a while that their wounds were not yet thoroughly cured, they got together all their forces, and came with greater fury and with greater numbers to Ascalon. But their former ill fortune followed them, as the consequence of their unskillfulness and other deficiencies in war. For Antonius laid ambushes for them in the passages they were to go through, where they fell upon snares unexpectedly, and where they were encompassed about with horsemen, before they could form themselves into a regular body for fighting, and were above 8,000 of them slain. So all the rest of them ran away, and with them Niger, who still did a great many bold exploits in this flight. However, they were driven along together by the enemy, who pressed hard upon them into a certain strong tower belonging to a village called Bezida. However, Antonius and his party, that they might neither spend any considerable time about this tower, which was hard to be taken, nor suffer their commander, and the most courageous man of them all, to escape from them, they set the wall on fire. And as the tower was burning, the Romans went away rejoicing, as taking it for granted that Niger was destroyed. But he leaped out of the tower into a subterraneous cave, into the innermost part of it, and was preserved. And on the 3rd day afterward he spake out of the ground to those that with great lamentation were searching for him in order to give him a decent funeral. And when he was come out, he filled all the Jews with an unexpected joy, as though he were preserved by God's providence to be their commander for their time to come. And now Vespasian took along with him his army from Antioch, which is the metropolis of Syria, and without dispute deserves a place of the third city in the habitable earth that was under the Roman Empire, both in magnitude and other marks of prosperity. Footnote: Spanheim and Rieland both agree that the two cities here esteemed greater than Antioch, the metropolis of Syria, were Rome and Alexandria, nor is there any occasion for doubt in so plain a case. End footnote. Where he found King Agrippa with all his forces waiting for his coming, and marched to Ptolemais. At this city also the inhabitants of Sepphoris of Galilee met him, who were for peace with the Romans. These citizens had beforehand taken care of their own safety, and being sensible of the power of the Romans, they had been with Cestius Gallus before Vespasian came, and had given their faith to him, and received the security of his right hand, and had received a Roman garrison. And at this time withal they received Vespasian, the Roman general, very kindly, and readily promised that they would assist him against their own countrymen. Now the general delivered them, at their desire, as many horsemen and footmen as he thought sufficient to oppose the incursions of the Jews, if they should come against them. And indeed the danger of losing Sepphoris would be no small one in this war that was now beginning, seeing it was the largest city of Galilee, and built in a place by nature very strong, and might be a security of the whole nation's fidelity to the Romans. Chapter 3. A description of Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. Now Phoenicia and Syria encompass about the Galilees, which are two, and called the Upper Galilee and the Lower. They are bounded toward the setting sun, with the borders of the territory belonging to Ptolemais, and by Carmel, which mountain had formerly belonged to the Galileans, but now belonged to the Tyrians. To which mountain adjoins Gaba, which is called the city of horsemen, because those horsemen that were dismissed by Herod the king dwelt therein. They are bounded on the south with Samaria and Scythopolis, as far as the river Jordan. On the east with Hippea and Gadarus, and also with Gamlanitis, and the borders of the kingdom of Agrippa. Its northern parts are bounded by Tyre, and the country of the Tyrians. As for that Galilee which is called the Lower, it extends in length from Tiberias to Zabulon, and of the maritime places Ptolemais is its neighbor. Its breadth is from the village called Zalath, which lies on the great plain, as far as Bersabeh, from which beginning also is taken the breadth of Upper Galilee, as far as the village of Baca, which divides the land of the Tyrians from it. Its length is also from Meloth to Thela, a village near to Jordan. These two Galilees, of so great largeness, and encompassed with so many nations of foreigners, have always been able to make a strong resistance on all occasions of war. For the Galileans are inured to war from their infancy, and have been always very numerous, nor hath the country been ever destitute of men of courage, or wanted a numerous set of them. For their soil is universally rich and fruitful, and full of the plantations of trees of all sorts, insomuch that it invites the most slothful to take pains in its cultivation by its fruitfulness. Accordingly, it is all cultivated by its inhabitants, and no part of it lies idle. Moreover, the cities lie here very thick, and the very many villages there are here are everywhere so full of people, by the richness of their soil, that the very least of them contain above 15,000 inhabitants. In short, if anyone will suppose that Galilee is inferior to Perea in magnitude, he will be obliged to prefer it before it in its strength. For this is all capable of cultivation, and is everywhere fruitful. But for Perea, which is indeed much larger in extent, the greater part of it is desert and rough, and much less disposed for the production of the milder kinds of fruits. Yet hath it a moist soil in other parts, and produces all kinds of fruits, and its plains are planted with trees of all sorts, while yet the olive tree, the vine, and the palm tree are chiefly cultivated there. It is also sufficiently watered with torrents, which issue out of the mountains, and with springs that never fail to run, even when the torrents fail them, as they do in the dog days. Now the length of Perea is from Machaerus to Pella, and its breadth from Philadelphia to Jordan. Its northern parts are bounded by Pella, as we have already said, as well as its western with Jordan. The land of Moab is its southern border, and its eastern limits reach to Arabia and Silbonitis, and besides to Philadelphine and Gerasa. Now as to the country of Samaria, it lies between Judea and Galilee. It begins at a village that is in the great plain called Guinea, and ends at the Acrabbene toparchy, and is entirely of the same nature with Judea. For both countries are made up of hills and valleys, and are moist enough for agriculture, and are very fruitful. They have abundance of trees, and are full of autumnal fruit, both that which grows wild, and that which is the effect of cultivation. They are not naturally watered by many rivers, but derive their chief moisture from rainwater, of which they have no want. And for those rivers which they have, all their waters are exceedingly sweet. By reason also of the excellent grass they have, their cattle yield more milk than do those in other places. And what is the greatest sign of excellency and of abundance, they each of them are very full of people. In the limits of Samaria and Judea lies the village of Anuath, which is also named Borchios. This is the northern boundary of Judea. The southern parts of Judea, if they be measured lengthways, are bounded by a village adjoining to the confines of Arabia. The Jews that dwell there call it Jordan. However, its breadth is extended from the river Jordan to Joppa. The city Jerusalem is situated in the very middle, on which account some have, with sagacity enough, called that city the navel of the country. Nor indeed is Judea destitute of such delights as come from the sea, since its maritime places extend as far as Ptolemais. It was parted into 11 portions, of which the royal city Jerusalem was the supreme, and presided over all the neighboring country as the head does over the body. As to the other cities that were inferior to it, they presided over their several toparchies. Gophna was the second of these cities, and next to that Acrabata, after them Thamna, and Lydda, and Emmaus, and Pella, and Idumea, and Engadi, and Herodium, and Jericho. And after them came Jamnia and Joppa, as presiding over the neighboring people. And besides these, there was the region of Gamala, and Galanatus, and Batania, and Trachonitis, which are also parts of the kingdom of Agrippa. This last country begins at Mount Libanus, and the foundations of Jordan, and reaches breadthways to the lake of Tiberias, and in length is extended from a village called Arpha as far as Julius. Its inhabitants are a mixture of Jews and Syrians. And thus have I, with all possible brevity, described the country of Judea and those that lie round about it. End of Book 3, chapters 1 through 3.